Okay, good morning everyone. For those who have been in our shul, who have heard some of the Shiurim, know that I often quote from Harav Berel Wein stories, anecdotes, information that I learned from his books, from his lectures, and his work and his contribution is something that is very dear to me. Not only something that I learned a lot from, but it's something that's very meaningful and dear to me. We did a small tribute to Rabbi Wein last night. We made a small clip, and I received a lot of feedback from it, especially from his students. I can't say that I'm a student of his formally. I never learned in his yeshiva Sharei Torah, although I would like to consider myself a student from his Shiurim and Svarim. But I heard from Talmidim of his, people who learned in his yeshiva, and some of the things they were saying were very touching. Somebody reached out that he lost his Rebbe and his second father. Somebody reached out that Rabbi Wein not only was a straight shooter, but he taught his Talmidim to shoot straight and to develop their own individualism, which is a point that I would like to focus on. Rabbi Wein wore many hats. He started off, obviously he started off as a yeshiva student, but in his professional career he started off as an attorney, and then he became a rabbi in Miami Beach, and then he was an executive for the OU, and he became a rav in Muncie, simultaneously opening up a yeshiva, and then he made aliyah. He went to Eretz Yisrael, he taught in Ar Sameach, and he became the rav of the shul in Rechavia, HaNasi, the HaNasi shul. And he was a writer, and he was a speaker, and he was a lecturer, and he was a historian, and he was a producer. He produced movies. He produced a movie about Rashi, about the Rambam, about Abarbanel. And it certainly could be said that if there's anybody in the last 100 years who brought history to life, we could say Rabbi Wein not only was a historian, but he brought history to life. That is certainly true. But what I would like to share with you this morning is what I think, I don't like to say that any particular point captures someone because people are so multifaceted, but I think this is a very important point that could capture a significant element of how he was able to make history to come to life. I would like to share with you 2 points, and one of them is from a personal conversation that I had with Rabbi Wein. First, I think we have to say over, in this context, a story that I've said over many times in the shul, and it's a story that Rabbi Wein himself writes is the single most impactful experience in his life. He has a book of his drashos called B'Mesila Na'ala in Hebrew. Also, he has an autobiography, which is also very revealing, and not every rabbi would have the guts to write an autobiography. You know, to have someone else write the biography, to write an autobiography. He wrote autobiography called Teach Them Diligently. I actually read this numerous times. And on page 1, he says over the story that in his Sefer B'Mesila Na'ala says was what he calls Kasavti Pam al Hachavaya Hagdola Sheshpia al Chayai. I'm going to write about the single most impactful experience that he had in his life. To me, this is so powerful. I put it in the Hakdama of the Sefer on Shemais, and that's when he was a bar mitzvah boy. He was about 13 years old. It was in the early 50s, and he was learning in the Skokie Yeshiva, and his father said, Berel, come, we have to go to the airport. A great rabbi is coming to the airport. Who? Rabbi Isaac Halevi Herzog, the chief rabbi. He's coming to Chicago. It was right after the Shoah, and he's going to speak to the Bachrim of the yeshiva. So Rabbi Wein went with his father, and they greeted Rabbi Herzog at the airport. Rabbi Herzog was a very noble and aristocratic personality. He wore a shiny top hat. He had a silver cane. He had a Tanakh that he carried with him. And Rabbi Herzog lit from the plane, and he's greeted by the yeshiva students in Skokie. He's greeted Rabbi Kupchik's hometown, right? Where you lived for many years. You're familiar?
I was a principal at the Skokie Yeshiva for 6 years.
Wow. Oh, so Rabbi Kupchik was the principal in the Skokie Yeshiva for 6 years. And when I spoke in Skokie, I had the pleasure of meeting Rabbi Kupchik for the first time. And all the boys gather in the auditorium, and Rav Herzog gave a 45-minute pilpul shir in Yiddish. And then he said, I want to have a few words with the young men, with the boys in the yeshiva. And Rav Herzog said, I just came back from audience with the Pope, from Pope Pius. I guess that's a Lashon Sagi Nahar, Pope Pius. And Rav Herzog said, I brought to the Pope a list of 10,000 boys and girls, the names of 10,000 boys and girls who were given over to Christian institutions, to monasteries, to priests, to Christian families during the Holocaust, Jewish families who didn't have any plan, didn't have any way to save their children. The only way they could save the lives of their children is by giving them over to these Christian families or institutions, hoping that their children would survive and one day they would see their children again, or if not, at least they would live. And Rav Herzog says, here's the list of these 10,000 names. There are children, we have their names documented. Give us our children back. And the Pope said, I'm sorry. All of these 10,000 young men and women were baptized, they were converted, and according to our religion, once a person is baptized and converted, they can never be returned to their formal religion. And the door was slammed on the face of Rav Herzog. By the way, I'll just tell you, this is a very meaningful story to me personally, because my grandfather, Rabbi Glatstein, met Rav Herzog in the DP camps, and Rav Herzog told my grandfather, he just came back from a meeting with the Pope. Rav Herzog then, this noble, aristocratic tzaddik and Talmid Chacham, breaks down crying at the lectern, and he weeps over the fate of these 10,000 young boys and girls. He then lifts his head like a lion, and he said, there's nothing I could do for these 10,000 young boys and girls. But turning to these yeshiva students in the Skokie Yeshiva, but what are you going to do for the future of the Jewish people? What will you do for the future of Klal Yisrael? And Rabbi Wein said those words were the most impactful words that he ever heard in his whole life. Whenever in life he's despondent, or he's down, or he's having a rough day, and he wants to throw in the towel, Rav Herzog's words are always ringing in his ears. What are you going to do for the future of the Jewish people? Now, I think that the mission of what are you going to do for the future of the Jewish people is one that Rabbi Berel Wein carried his whole life. He wasn't just a scholar. He wasn't just a teacher. He's someone who felt the responsibility to make a contribution for the destiny of the Jewish people. That was the name of his organization, the Destiny Foundation. There are many people who are focused on their personal avodas Hashem, and that is very great, and that is very noble. But he tried to elevate people by giving people a sense of mission. That clarion call of Rav Herzog, what will you do for the future of the Jewish people? Rabbi Berel Wein tried to elevate people by allowing people to think beyond their own personal service of Hashem. What can you do as an individual, as a father, as a mother, as a head of a family, as a member of a community, as a member of the Jewish people? What could you do to contribute to the Jewish people? Now, in terms of how he brought history alive, I would like to bring out two very powerful but subtle points. You see, sometimes, I always hear people say, oh, history, I love history, it's so interesting. I don't know, it's like an empty statement. When you love history, what do you love about it? You love the numbers, you love the facts, it's interesting. For many historians, history is just dry facts, dates and names and cities and wars and generals. One thing Rabbi Wein taught was that history is not made by countries, it's not made by parties or political movements. History is not made by movements. History is the story of people. Rabbi Wein saw history as a story of people. And by the way, this is something we see in our times. History is not made by Democrats or Republicans, it's made by individuals. I mean, the president we have today is one of the most impactful personalities in many, many decades as a person, not as a member of a political group, as a person. History is made by people. And Rabbi Wein brought out the unique facets of great people in history as people. You know, even the way he spoke about great chachamim, or great Talmid Chachamim, or great leaders that he had personal contact with. He always spoke about the Panovich Rav. Rabbi Wein met the Panovich Rav when the Panovich Rav came down to Miami Beach. He would drive the Panovich Rav around. He spoke about his interactions with Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. He would ask Rabbi Yaakov many questions, especially in the running of his yeshiva. He would speak about the Satmar Rebbe. Even though I don't think he had the same view about the state of Israel as a Satmar Rebbe, but he recognized Satmar Rebbe as a very great leader and a very great tzaddik. And he brought these people to life. So, Rabbi Wein saw history not as a collection of facts and cities and names, but the story of people. And people are colorful, and people are interesting, and people are alive. And he also saw how the same issues and problems and struggles that people had 2,000 years ago are the same struggles that we have today. So history was not an old static story, because the same struggles that the generals that in the Gemara and Gittin had, that Vespasian and Titus and Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, the same issues they were dealing with, we are dealing with the same issues today on Chaf Gimel Av, Tavshin Pei. Hey, thank you very much, 5,785. It's the same story. You see, if it's about names or facts or dates, well, the dates are different, the facts are different, but it's about human nature. You see, history is a story of human nature, and human nature is dynamic and it's alive, and therefore history is not just something that happened in the past, it's something that we have to live with. You know, he has a famous story about when he moved to Eretz Yisrael and he made Aliyah, and he took his, he had to take a road test. If you move to Israel, you got to take another road test. I don't know, that's, you know, it sounds like, I'm not sure I would be able to handle that. Take another road test where you're going to pull out of the spot and you can do parallel parking. I have to remember if I know, I mean, I know how to do it by feel, but to remember the exact angle that you start turning back with both hands, you're going to have to put both hands back on the wheel. Anyway, he said that the day that he took his road test, the tester took him in an urban area where usually there's a lot of traffic, and on that day there were no cars on the street. So after he finished the test, the tester said, you know, I don't know if this counts. This test shouldn't count. There's no traffic today. So Wein said, what do you mean? You know, why can't we use Rashi in Parshas Noach? Rashi says about Noach was a tzaddik in his rotten generation. If he would have been in Avram's generation, imagine how big of a tzaddik he would have been. So if I drove so well without anything slowing me down, imagine how well I would drive if I had to drive slowly. So Wein said, only in Israel could you pass a road test with a Rashi, you know? Which, by the way, is another unique way that he saw the state of Israel. Even though many say, well, you know, it's not run by people who we agree with their outlook on life. Rabbi Wein saw it for what it was. It was Eretz Yisrael. It's the land of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. It's we mentioned last night. It's Eretz Asher Tamid Einei Hashem Elokecha Ba. It's Eretz Asher Lo Yisech Sar Kol Ba. It's the land of the Jewish people. And he would take significance about the names of streets in Eretz Yisrael. He gave a series of shiurim on the names of the streets in Yerushalayim. But here's what I want to share with you that's most important. So number one, he brought history alive because it wasn't a story of facts and dates. It was a story of people and human nature. But I think most importantly, I'm going to tell you a personal story. I can't tell you all the details, but I once asked him a question. I called him up. I had a certain question, and I was thinking, Baruch Hashem, I have a lot of mentors and great Talmidei Chacham I speak with. This particular question, I said, you know what, I'm going to call Rabbi Berel Wein. It wasn't even so long ago. And I'm pretty busy usually. I have what to do to keep me busy. And it was a question about attending a certain event, a family event. And he told me something very interesting. He said, if you don't go, because I can't go to every family event. And he said, he even told me, you have your important work for the community. Sometimes that has to take precedence, or very often has to take precedence. He told me, if you don't go to this thing, it will reverberate throughout the generations. And that was a very searing statement. It will reverberate throughout the generations. And it gave me a very deep insight into how he would see the world. Because I think it's a mistake to say that he was a historian. A historian is somebody who studies history for the sake of studying the past. He saw history as a way as a lens to understand what's unfolding before our eyes now. It was a living reality, and it has to be used as a lens to be able to see the future. Because back to his driving test, he always tells the story how the tester happened to divulge to him, which you're not supposed to do, especially in Israel, that he's a good driver. So I wanted to, what do you like about my driving? So the tester said, before you pulled out, you looked out the rear view mirror before you pulled out of the spot. Nobody here in Israel doesn't. Nobody looks at the rear view mirror before they pull out of the spot. And Rabbi Wein said that's exactly the problem with our generation. We think, Jewish life began in Flatbush or Borough Park or Queens, and we advance in our life as if, the Jewish world started 10 years ago. We never look at the rear view mirror before we advance in our lives. In order to have a successful future as a Yid, as a Jew, you need to know where you came from. You need to know your history. You need to know the story of the Jewish people in the 20th century, which he wrote a book on. You need to know the story of the Jewish people over the last 150 years, which he wrote a book on. You need to know the story of the Jewish people over the last 500 years, which he wrote a book on. You need to know the story of the Jewish people over the last 1,000 years. He wrote a book, the story of the Jewish people of the 20th century. He wrote a book, Triumph of Survival, maybe. He wrote 4 history books. He wrote a book on the story of the Tanoim, the book on the story of the Amoraim. So he was a man who, when he looked at the future, he was looking at the rearview mirror. For him, history was not about the past. It was about the future of the Jewish people. It rarely will you hear somebody say that the decision you make about whether to go to a certain place will reverberate throughout the generations, because he saw everything. He saw life unfolding in a historical context. He saw whether you go to this event, this is not a one-time decision. This is not an isolated event. Whether you go or not, it's not like, well, yes or no, and then we'll forget about it. It will reverberate until the end of time, because he saw all of Jewish history supporting how every decision that a Jew makes will indeed reverberate until the end of time. So he brought history alive, not only through his, by the way, he was a brilliant reader. One of his grandchildren told me he was a speed reader. He could get through massive tomes, like massive books of thousands of pages, and remember every single detail. So it wasn't only his ability to process tremendous amount of information. It wasn't only his ability to remember the details of the information. It wasn't only his dynamic personality, his dry sense of humor. Yes, all of this contributed to make history alive. But it was more than that. He saw history as a story of people, and even more importantly, he saw history as the living reality of something that will repeat itself, and it was his lens to be able to see the future and the destiny of the Jewish people. So there's another well-known story that I think also speaks volumes about how he saw the world when he visited the newly opened Holocaust Museum for Children. In Yad Vashem, they opened up a new branch of the of the museum to commemorate the 1.5 million Jewish children that were killed in the Holocaust. And he writes how he went into the museum expecting to see maybe videos or pamphlets, and he was completely unprepared for what he was about to experience. You go into a dark room, a pitch black room. It was so dark. You ever go into a dark room? It's so dark, you can't even see 1 foot ahead of the other. And in that room, all you hear is voices that play. Miriam Cohen, 11 years old. Vilna. Sam Milstein, 13 years old. Sarajevo. Names and names and names and names until you want to run out and disappear. And Rabbi Wein always says, one thing struck him. I was that age. I didn't hear my name on that list. I didn't hear my name called on that list. And if I didn't hear my name, then I can still do something. I can still contribute to the Jewish people. He was a man who saw and took messages from the world around him, not only from events, but from observations of even the mundane in life. So he brought history to life because to him history was the living story of the Jewish people and the lens of how we could continue successfully and live our lives successfully. And he very much believed that the ultimate destiny of the Jewish people was unfolding before our eyes, and especially in Eretz Yisrael. So he was a very great man, a very great scholar. If I may, one more story. I've said the story on Tisha B'Av, but I want to say the story now. I'll say very briefly of how the Panovich Rav once had this parlor meeting for young couples in Miami Beach, and he told them there are 1.5 million Jewish children floating in the air. Their souls that were killed in the Holocaust, their souls are looking for bodies. It's incumbent upon you, you young couples, to create the gufim for these souls that are floating in the air. And we recently explained that the basis of this idea is that in the spiritual world, nothing is lost. Only the kalim sometimes are lost, but the souls are always extant. And if you rebuild new kalim, you could, so to speak, bring back whatever was temporarily taken. So it's certainly worthwhile to study the life of Rabbi Wein, and there are many lessons we can learn. And all of his great contributions are not only Oisiyos Parchas floating in the air, but they're still here with us. You could still partake of his great wisdom, listen to his classes, and he has a lot of great books and svarim. Yehi Zichrei Baruch. He should be a Me'eretz Yosher for the Jewish people and for Eretz Yisrael that he loved very much. Thank you very much.